The two procurement nerds are back and recording again in heat wave. It is like 100 plus today in the Bay Area, and it's really, really hot. So I don't want to go outside.
Although I will just give a plug for Oakland. It's only 73 here, so it's actually
Really, you're like
yeah,
30 degrees cooler.
yeah. And we're probably not even like 20 miles apart. Maybe we're 10 miles
Yeah,
as the crow flies. Yeah.
as you're wearing a scarf and I'm in a tank top. I should have picked up on that. All right, so Dr. E, what are we going to chat about today?
We're going to talk about AI native. That is the term du jour. And Sarah's going to define it here in a second. But I do want to give credit because the first time the term popped up on my radar was by our friends of the show, Stan and Alex, the co-founders of Level Path and of many other successful startups. And they were starting to talk about it. I'm going to say 2 years ago. That I'm probably off in that because I can't remember anything these days. However, they put that term into my brain, and I have been sort of watching that and watching the market evolve, not just in procurement, but just all across the board. And so it's been interesting to watch it evolve. So credit to them. And I will just say one thing as sort of background. This is not the first time we've had the quote unquote native vernacular, because we had for a number of years cloud native, and that referred to apps that were built fit for purpose for cloud, or adoption in the cloud, or deployment in the cloud is probably more accurate. And then we had digital natives, which referred to the younger generations that grew up with technology versus the I forget what they used to call the old people, but anyway, the digital immigrants or something, or I don't know. Anyway, and now we have AI native, which I think is it's time to really delve into this, because this not only impacts how we think about procurement systems, but also how we buy systems that use AI. So
Yeah.
maybe why don't we start with a definition?
Yeah. So, how I like to look at it is comparing AI enabled to AI native. To me, that's kind of the useful way to look at it. So, how I look at AI enabled is a more traditional product that was established before AI, and they've added AI functionality to the product, kind of like a bolt on. To me, AI native means the product was actually designed and built using AI as the foundation. So these are products that are very new and that have been built, I don't know, let's say in the last 12 to 18 months. So another way that I like to look at it is what would happen? So let's say you're in procurement and you're evaluating a product, for example. What would happen if you turned the AI off? If it's an AI-enabled product, you lose convenience. The product still works and functions, it just may not do as much, and it may not function as quickly. If it's an AI native product and you turn AI off, you lose the product. So it completely shuts down and you're not able to use it. So that's kind of in my mind when I'm looking at something, that's how I define it. So why this matters is, again, thinking about our procurement audience here. AI enabled products tend to plateau at some point. Bolt on gets you, I don't know, 10, 15, 20% of the way, where an AI native product changes what the job actually is.
I would add there too, it changes the extensibility of the tool. And if you'll permit me to just go on a slight tangent for a moment, many years ago, the Mac operating system was this sort of hard coded legacy monolith. And so it was not prepared to scale for the future. And what they did is they spent like a year or two. I can't. It was in the early '90s or mid '90s, so it was a long time ago. But they basically went back and rewrote the entire operating system based on Unix, which is one of the probably the most popular operating system out there. And by doing that, they gave them the extensibility to grow infinitely into the sprawling OS that we have today. And with the only exception being now that well, iOS and sort of the Android, iPhone sort of touchscreen operating systems, but I have sort of like that's kind of the new thing. But that move to a Unix native operating system really did well for Apple over those probably 2 decades. And I do think going AI native would to me would be the current corollary on that.
Yeah, that's a good. I feel like probably the bulk of our listeners have some Apple product
Yeah.
or have had at least, used one at some point. So now that we've kind of level set on how we define what AI native actually means versus something that is AI enabled, I think it's important to talk about how to spot what I call AI washing in a supplier evaluation. So if you are running an RFP, an RFI, you're going out to the market and looking for new solutions, I think it can be really challenging as someone in procurement or really in any function to really understand the AI functionality in a product because when you look at website and materials, almost everyone is touting AI this and AI that. But how do you know what it actually means and how do you know if something is AI native or not?
Well, and people have been espousing quote unquote AI for it just at least the last 10 years just in the marketing cycles. So I do think we have to acknowledge that this was already overhyped long before ChatGPT became or had its moment.
Yeah. So what I put together, I kind of put my procurement hat on or my buyer hat on. And if I were in the market right now, let's say looking for a procure tech solution, what would I ask for? What would I want to know from the supplier? So I'll kind of walk through my list of 5 questions. I would want to know, when did AI enter your product? So this is like the whole asking for the timeline. If a company was founded in 2014 and they introduced AI features in 2023, definitely bolt on, definitely AI enabled. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying it's important for you to know, and the product should be priced accordingly as well once you have that information.
Yeah. Well, and can I say that the reason that's super important is there will be a end of life on bolt-ons. Like bolt-ons are not built for longevity. They're short-term fixes to a long-term technical problem.
Yeah. Um, Question 2 that I have on my list that I would ask is, what breaks if I disable the AI? Because that'll give you a real sense of you're using the newest, Claude or ChatGPT or model, and then something gets pulled or goes away, and your system that you just purchased is based on that. What does that mean to you? So I think it's important to know going into it.
Well, and there might be a lot of different reasons for, I mean, you might be under regulatory scrutiny and not be allowed or not want to have any use of AI in any of your tools. So, could you turn that feature off or that part of the system? And is AI still being used in the tool? Like that is That's an important question or distinction to figure out.
Well, especially for security, that's going to definitely be a factor for your security team and sort of compliance and, the risk management piece of it. So knowing that can make it easier or more difficult to get something approved as well. Third question that I would ask is, show me it running on my data.
This is not just an AI thing, but it makes it so much better with AI.
Yeah. And this goes back to, in my world in IT, we call it a POC, or proof of concept. But the idea is that instead of looking at something that somebody that's polished and they've made pretty, being able to actually input and test your own data in an environment before you're actually going out and doing a full purchase. So again, to your point, Dr. Eloise, not only for AI, but I think this is a useful thing to be asking when you're trying to figure out and assess the AI component of something.
Well, and I will add that we go back to the build versus buy. One of the things that's so powerful about the build is if I'm just building something in Claude, I'm using my data out of the gate. So I'm seeing in real time everything I do and everything I build is with my data. That's one reason why it's very viscerally powerful, because it's my data, my environment, my way of thinking. And you don't, with any vendor, a proof of concept takes time and you have to get all the agreements in place, and so it does, like, that's where it slows down, and that's where, hey, I'm just gonna open up toss some data in and see what, like, I just got off a call talking to somebody that was doing that with contracts, and just bang 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 bang. And so I think that's an important point to really, today's not about build versus buy, but like seeing your point, seeing my data in the system is super important.
Yep. All right. Fourth question is, what is your error rate and how do you measure it? And if you're talking to a supplier and they can't answer it, it's a pretty good sign that they have not been measuring it. So someone who's really doubled down on AI potentially has an AI team in-house, has some sort of evaluation infrastructure, and can tell you accuracy on specific tasks. Things that would trigger for me would be answers like continuous improvement, or things that are very vague and general versus talking about specific metrics and specific processes.
What are you doing to prevent hallucinations, and how much can I customize this? And really, what are the governance guardrails? And that's the difference between an AI native system and just a bolt-on, because, like, if you can't explain those differences and sort of what are the guardrails, I'm not taking your word for it that some coder put in something, in the background. Because just today I saw a headline that said the fourth of the big four just got caught using chat GPT or AI of some variety, and it hallucinated and made up all the research elements. And so, like, I'm not trusting. I need, like, if we're talking governance, I want much more trust, and I'm not taking your word for it.
So, good example of this, my partner who works at Lawrence Livermore, he's a material scientist. Because they're government funded and work on, highly classified projects for the government and large corporations, the trust piece is really, really important to them. So they were very slow to roll out AI internally at the lab, months and months of vetting and testing. And one of their big proof points was the hallucination piece.
Yeah.
For the type of work they do, a hallucination, it's not just oh, I'm going to accidentally say the wrong word in a blog post. It could have detrimental impacts to security and very important things that impact the way that our government operates and functions. So that's an example where they were you could say they were very slow to go to market with AI, but they did it for that specific reason.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, we'll probably get more into this, but you just shared an article earlier about the DeepSeek's cost, like
Yep.
fractional cost compared to Anthropic and OpenAI, and that is like the origin of the AI provider. Because let's just say like me and my neighbor go create a startup that's built and it's AI, and whether it's bolt on or not, we have to really think about where are the underlying models coming from. As you talk about security or the potential for the AI to do something that is malicious, either intentionally or unintentionally. And it's no coincidence that this week we a couple articles about how AI is jumping containment. So we're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah. What Dr. Eloise is talking about is an article I just found yesterday or this morning, and shared it about the cost of AI companies in China right now, 100 times cheaper than Anthropic.
Yeah.
And so it's bringing to question, how much does security and working with a US company matter when the price differential is so great?
And by the way, having spent a lot of time in UK and Europe this year, the question they're asking themselves is they don't want to be dependent on American companies, especially for something as strategically important as AI. And they're not necessarily interested in working with China either. So there's a big push over there to decouple from other global entities. And it is just from a sort of political science point of view, interesting to see how technology is at the forefront of these geopolitical issues. And so watching the EU build data centers, that's been one of the themes this year, and watching them now start to build out their AI models, I mean, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. All right, my last question on my list is, how much of your engineering team is on AI, and how much of of and how much of the roadmap? Let me say that again. How much of your engineering team is on AI, and how much of the roadmap? So I think sometimes buyers get really focused on, and I've actually been in conversations where I've actually heard people say that they are really focused on model is somebody on. Are you on the newest model, right? That's kind of their big focus. I would argue that matters far less than how the vendor has structured your data and
Mhm.
designed the workflow around it. So as a buyer, I would pick a well-designed system on a mid-tier model versus a badly designed one on the best model. So it's really important to dive in and not focus just on the model piece of it.
Yeah, I want to extend this too a little bit, because as you think about buying AI systems, and maybe I'm sort of just jumping ahead, but this is so fascinating. The other piece in everything we just talked about is you you the legit players, and again, the Matt McCarrick, from the founder of Sligo, now a Spend HQ company, he brought this to my attention, so I just want to give him credit too, because the ability to take your AI native product and put it behind the firewall and not have to manage it is a key component of this. Because if in your local environment you have AI, or like your partner,
Mhm.
Like if they have AI running internally and they're never going to go out to Anthropic or OpenAI's data centers, can I sell my product to them, which requires a level of sophistication
Mhm.
that I can put behind, to put it behind the firewall. And that takes design, good, well-grounded design. And you certainly can't do that with a bolt-on. And the beauty of AI is that it can be composable or collapsible, anyway, whatever it is, or it can be packaged up, containerized, and then moved into a very secure Livermore Labs. And I suspect over time, more and more companies,
Mhm.
enterprises, as they wrap their heads around this, don't want to be sending AI back and forth outside the firewall.
No.
And so, this really shows the legitimacy of the AI nativeness and the engineering and design, as you were talking about.
Yeah. All right. So those are the 5 questions. Now I'm going to move into, again, buyer hat on, thinking about what would I be caring about and focused on if I was in a procurement seat. The pricing model is kind of blowing up.
That's one word
And
for it.
I would say that this is probably something that just about everyone is not really prepared for, in that the suppliers are not really sure how to price and how to figure this out. And then on the buy side, it's really hard to figure out what to even ask and how to structure contracts when the pricing is changing so fast. So I think the logic of the per seat pricing is that value scales with the number of people using a tool. If agents are doing the work of people, the logic kind of collapses. So you could be paying more per seat with needing fewer seats, or paying for seats whose work is now being automated. So the trap, and I don't know if trap is the right word, but something to look out for, is vendors that sell you AI, and I've seen this, kind of become um kind of a common trend in some verticals, is they're now saying, we'll help you reduce headcount. So we're actually going to save you money because when you implement our solution, you need less bodies. But then they hold you to a seat minimum for an extended amount of time. So you've almost paid for your own efficiency gain twice in that
Yeah,
model.
yeah.
Um,
It defies logic, yeah. And by the way, to say nothing of the fact that tokens now today are more expensive than the humans. Now that I've long contended, back to our Connect House event, that calculus is going to change. And the article you sent about the Chinese models
yeah.
is going to force that forward. But still, it's squishy.
Yeah. So emerging alternatives, which we've talked about several times throughout our shows, is this whole model of consumption-based pricing. What is consumption? In some cases, it's per task, sometimes it's per document. I've seen now per API call becoming popular for data aggregators that are pulling together data into kind of a central hub or central source of truth. And then outcome pricing is another one. So I've seen per ticket resolved, or things like per validated record. And then you've got hybrid platform plus usage. So the three kind of different models that I'm seeing more and more. And I think, so the reason I wanted to bring this up is to talk about what people should be negotiating now
Right.
that you've got this change. And a couple things that come to mind for me are thinking about a spend cap or ceiling. having
Mhm.
something clearly documented, where I think it was Uber
Yeah.
CFO came out and said, they blew their entire AI budget in just a couple months because they didn't have some sort of spend cap or ceiling in the contract. So really,
Mhm.
really be careful about that.
Well, and thresholds that alert you that because it's you don't
Yes.
want to get to the, oh, we've already eclipsed our budget for the year. Like you want some markers along the way that says, whoa, pump the brakes.
Yes. Yeah. Another thing that I think is important to think about when you're negotiating pricing is flexibility on seat counts. So if the product's premise is reducing manual work and either reducing headcount or allowing you to reallocate people's work to more strategic activities, the contract should let your seat count reflect that. So you should have some flexibility to lower that seat count. And then the other thing that would be important to me is a defined unit. So what is a task? Is it a workflow run? Really, really make sure you have the billable unit defined in your contract, and not in the order form.
Yeah. On the outcome based, I actually just was listening to something earlier today, and Brett Taylor, who is the former co-CEO of Salesforce, just launched Sierra, which is a sort of AI native, my words, competitor to Salesforce. And one of the things that Sierra has, which by the way, not to be confused with Sierra Ventures. So there's the use of Sierra is used a lot, but or Sierra Nevada, which is the beer or whatever.
Sierra Nevada so I was born and raised in Chico, and Sierra Nevada founders started the brewery there. It's one of the biggest employers in Chico. And so I know them well. I've toured their facility multiple times.
There you go, perfect. Um, and it was just funny because neither of us drink, but that's
No.
anyway. I gotten us way off topic. um, but Sierra actually, one of the things is for tickets that get opened. If AI doesn't resolve it, you don't pay for it, and so it is charged by. So it's back to that outcome pricing, and I thought that was interesting. Whereas in Salesforce, the article I was listening to was critiquing them because you get tagged like the price. I forget exactly what the mechanism is, but it really punishes you, or you get charged no matter what the outcome is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. My question there would be, who defines success?
Right. But like if I reach out for a password reset, just to go back to
Yeah.
old date, I don't think we have passwords anymore, but like I used to have to call the help desk for a password reset. If I could ask the AI for it, it somehow my password gets changed, the ticket's closed. That is a successful outcome, and so like that would be easy. Now, I think the question when you said that for me came up to, well, I ask a question like my whatever's not working, then it gets escalated to the next tier. Like now is that agent or that whatever AI able to follow that through, or does a new ticket get created and does that first one close out because actually the AI did what it was supposed to do, but the issue still like I get and I so
There's
totally
very
agree to.
when you're, working in a support center, there's definitely varying levels of requests that come in, and you're right, there's some very basic that are probably simple to track, but when you get to very complex tasks, you could have an AI agent saying that something was completed when it wasn't completed to satisfaction,
Yep.
or, only a piece or component without looking at the whole thing. So there's a piece of defining what is success.
Yeah.
So, kind of tying into pricing a little bit, is talking about contract terms that maybe weren't even in existence or didn't matter 3 years ago,
Yeah.
but that matter a lot now. So thinking through, what should procurement practitioners really think about and focus on when you're looking through the fine print. And I think the kind of top of mind biggest one for me is data rights.
Yep.
Is your data being used to train models?
Yep.
And I think getting a very clear answer to that in writing is important, not just, a sentence or two on the website or a sentence or two kind of that isn't detailed and specific. That's a huge one. And then I think another one that kind of ties to this is exit rights. So
Yes.
let's say you're in a 3-year contract and somebody has been using their data to train their models, and you've been building workflows and building a lot of action. And let's say you leave, decide not to renew, what of that you've built and done comes with you?
It used to be I'm using a SaaS tool. I put my data in. Okay, I close out. We just drop that database or that part of the database, and it's done, and we move on happily. But with AI, that data becomes intertwined in the AI, and or my data becomes intertwined, and it's not so easy to extract it because it's inferred and reasoned with that data. So now the model's smarter, the capabilities are smarter. And then, as you said, like I have the killer workflow for, I don't know, onboarding suppliers because we do that so well. We do it better than anybody else. Or we have the best requisition for like biologics and because we're a pharma company. And so we leave. Are you going to delete all that IP that, or do you get to keep it? And that's a thorny question. And I suspect that question alone, or sort of what happens when I exit, is
Mhm.
probably going to be why I would argue that cloud-based AI is not going to survive in the enterprise. I think we're going to just make a leap to it's going to be internal, whether it's built or bought. Although I would sort of nudge that we might go more build, but I don't want to be putting my data out there. And I think ITs, though they are not really relevant anymore, this will be one area where they can put their foot down. And I think it's going to stifle off cloud or outside the firewall type AI.
And then the other one that kind of is top of mind for me is SLAs, right? So these are kind of tried and true. You're in procurement, you want to have your SLAs clearly defined. And I think historically, one of the important metrics was uptime. Your uptime is, 97, 98, 99%. But I would argue uptime isn't really that useful for AI. So I think you need to really look at setting SLAs based on quality instead. And the reason I say that is you could have an AI model that has a great uptime, but um, accuracy should matter more.
Yeah.
So you've got a model that's running, but it's hallucinating and spitting out wrong data, but you have a 99.9% uptime.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, and there's like the corollary to that is there's liability. So look at like they said, the big four consulting firms have all generated AI reports that have been debunked as garbage. Now, I fault the firms because the managers, the overseers, the human overseers did not do their jobs. They did not manage. So it's very much a human failure, but you could argue that at some point the failure of the AI broke an SLA.
Yeah.
Obviously, like especially if you were an intermediary.
Mhm. Which then brings me to my probably the nearest and dearest to my heart, given I'm in the IT space and data is central to the work that we do, is data.
Hmm.
So I think as a procurement professional, you really, really have to figure out how to get good, clean data, keep it clean, because if you are running using AI and implementing automation and you have crappy data, you're only going to accelerate bad data and you're going to really put your company at risk. So I think speed is tough here because we always want to be faster and better and beat out our competitors. But if you don't solve the foundational data problem first and you have speed, you're going to accelerate bad data.
Yeah. And so then it just gets to this idea of like, I mean, it begs a more fundamental question. If I have bad master data, which to me in 2026 is unconscionable, but I acknowledge that's the reality. But how are we using AI if we don't have good data? And I'm not saying that's an impediment because you can do AI, but you have to be much more thoughtful about it because you feed a bunch of bad data, your AI is going to behave in ways it's not you don't want it to.
Yeah. So data is foundational and it really should be at the core of all decisions that organizations are making right now from a data perspective. And if you don't have your data in order, which many organizations don't, prioritize that versus going out and just buying the newest shiny object that your stakeholders are requesting.
Yeah.
You gotta kind of take a step back and you get your house in order first before you start going out and implementing and buying AI solutions.
Yeah.
So, what is kind of tying this all together? What
Well,
does
I have one more on that. I would just want
Oh,
to
okay.
add one more. I think the question if for procurement folks as we go to market, if I'm going to go to market for a fill in the blank tool, doesn't really matter. I think you got to come. I know I keep harping on this, but you also have to think about the build versus buy in a way that we haven't had. So if we're going to go to market for a spend visibility tool, like you have to ask that fundamental question from the get go. Well, why can't I not just dump the spend data into Claude and get it back, or your CLM system? Because let's say it one more time, CLM is dead. So even if I am going out to market, like we have to just ask these fundamental challenge questions, no matter where they come, whether the CFO is asking for it, the CIO might be asking for it, or like so. These are considerations we have to take into account.
Mhm. Yeah, so much to think about now before you're just rushing to run your RFP or RFI or, kind of check out what's in the market.
Well, and also think about your negotiating power. Like it's vastly
Mhm.
different when there's the switching costs are high, the vendor lock-in is real, at least right now, and at the enterprise level, it's a little easier for as us as individuals to bounce around. And but I mean, these are procurement considerations for doing enterprise procurement of AI, and the consolidation will come. It always comes. So yeah.
So kind of tying all of this together, I think, I want to hone in on what I think this means for the procurement function. I think procurement is as many functions is kind of being rebuilt by AI. Like what
Yes.
procurement looked like even 6 months ago, I feel like is so different. And I just a couple reasons why I think this. I think from an intake and triage perspective, you now have organizations with agents routing requests, pulling prior contracts,
Yep.
and flagging duplicate spend before a human ever has eyes on something. So
Yep.
kind of that initial entry level kind of look and summary, I think is different and is very much alive. Contract review is another one. Having AI do a first pass. So
Right.
your legal team is focused on what matters most and not kind of those little nuance things that something like AI can quickly flag and address. And then another one for me is supplier discovery and market coverage. So this is being able to assess, the hundreds of suppliers versus just, let's say, a dozen or so. So because the research time has gone down so much, the volume of data that you can consume and look at and assess helps you expand your search quite a bit. Now, I would flag it doesn't mean the data is always right.
Yeah.
So it's pulling from, it could hallucinate or pulling from sources that aren't correct. But in theory, you can look at a lot more solutions and hone in on, what's going to be best for your organization.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that those are it's not all doom and gloom. I do think AI is already being used in some pretty incredible ways for procurement. And I think we're going to see that expand quite a bit. But really the reason we wanted to talk about this is I think there's still a lot of confusion around the right questions to ask and how to assess different products that are touting themselves as, AI native, and that may not actually be accurate.
Yeah. And also there's a little bit of a nuance in that not only do we have sort of AI native sort of let's call them platforms like well anyway, I want to be careful not to name names here, but or to name drop, but then there's also AI productivity tools like a Gamma or like a Notebook LM, which are part of
Mhm.
sort of just being more effective at using sort of traditional productivity tools or Claude plugin for Excel. Um, but then there's also this idea of AI employees or temp labor, agentic, labor. Like these are elements that you have to factor in of like it's not just buying a Salesforce license like it was. It's the types of software or that we're buying are vastly different. I
Yeah,
also oh go ahead.
and
Yeah.
so many new companies. I mean, even in the last 6 to 8 months that, like, you wouldn't have even thought of, like, full new categories completely emerging.
Yeah. I had one other thought on the quality or sort of quality pricing,
Yeah.
because there's another element that has really popped up, and that's the idea of deterministic versus generative and or heuristic. Because if you're going to do math, you want 1 plus 1 to always equal 2, and if it doesn't, sorry Sabrina, like it's feeding time at the zoo, so a little bit of it. We'll figure it out later. Anyway, sorry, we'll come back to center here. There's a deterministic aspect of this because you want the math to math, as the kids say. If 1 plus 1, if it's deterministic, and we're doing something like financial reporting, 1 plus 1 always has to equal 2. Whereas, like something that's generative, it can be different every time. And so as we are evaluating whatever tool it is, like you don't want to spend an analysis tool that is giving you different answers every time. And yet, for something like intake, it's never going to be the same thing twice. So just, I wanted to add that. I had forgotten about that earlier.
Yeah, good call out. Intake kind of took over, and I think the way that intake happens is so different. And I think companies are evaluating and assessing, do we need an intake platform, or is this something that we can do ourselves if the real end use case is solely intake?
Yeah.
Alrighty, I think that's a wrap for the pod this week. We will be back next Wednesday.